Hi, my name is Paul and I like to go places. Unfortunately, I live in Canada, so all of those places are on fire right now. So I think today's video is just going to be talking about my Jeep. So what I have here is a 2006 Jeep Wrangler Rubicon. I bought this a few years ago, mainly because I needed a bit of a change for what I was driving. My experience has been with small Hondas. I'd never owned a Jeep before or a 4x4, but yeah, like my experience with mechanical stuff is building up small Hondas, making them faster than they should be. And yeah, I guess one day the police pulled me over and they said, "Paul, why are you doing 60 over the limit?" And then they took my car away. So I decided that I needed to drive something slow. That's why I bought a Jeep. I also realized that there's much more fun to be had off-road than staying on the highways. So originally, my budget was around 10,000 Canadian dollars, and I was basically looking for, you know, a TJ Sport or something. My requirements were really just the 4.0, and yeah, it was basically up to whatever I could find near me. And this Rubicon popped up in a city that was about a 4-hour drive from me, and this was about 15,000, so way over what I was hoping to spend on a Jeep. But then I kind of got to thinking, well, the Rubicon does have a few things that I do like, such as, you know, the Dana 44 axles. I figure if I'm doing a lot of wheeling on my own, you know, and I had axles braking when I'm in the middle of nowhere, well, you know, I probably wouldn't enjoy that. So I figured that I should probably just say to hell with the budget, buy the Rubicon, and, you know, I'll just cry about my finances later. And that's exactly what I did. And I don't regret it. I am definitely glad that I ended up with this model, primarily because the modifications that I plan on making to it now, I think are easier because of the, you know, like the drive shaft with the slip yoke eliminator and whatever else. Because had I had the base model TJ, and then if I decided to do a large lift, I'd probably start ending up into things where I had to drop the transfer case or whatever you have to do. So I'm not overly familiar with building a 4x4, and I didn't really want to have to do a whole lot of research into it. So, but yeah, when I bought this, it was pretty much stock. Now, I didn't realize it at the time, but it does have a body lift. The body lift, I'm not sure what it is. I think it's probably about 1¼ inches. At least that's my best guess. I kind of tried to measure it, and that seems like what it was, you know, close to. So, but yeah, the body lift was really the only thing done to it, because it did actually have 31-inch tires on it. And I think one of the previous owners put the body lift on there to clear the larger tires. So I guess, yeah, I didn't really think about it at the time, because yeah, I don't know anything about Jeeps. So I ended up finding out about that later. And what I did find about, when I realized there was a body lift in there, I thought, okay, well, a lot of people talk about if you have a body lift, then you probably need to have the motor mount lifts, and you also have to like raise the steering shaft so that, you know, it doesn't have a really bad angle to it and maybe bind up a bit. So, you know, I'm learning about all these different things that you have to be wary about if you have a body lift. So luckily, the previous owner who did the body lift actually did all of that as well. So now I'm not entirely sure if they also did anything with the linkage for the transfer case. I haven't really looked into that yet. The lever works just fine, so I'm not really concerned about it. But yeah, like I had to go look at the engine mounts, and I realized there was a spacer on the motor mounts, and then yeah, there was like a homemade spacer that was put underneath the steering linkage. So all of my concerns about having a body lift, thankfully, were taken care of. A body lift is probably not something I would have been installing myself, but now that it has it, I'm perfectly fine with it. It just seems like something I probably wouldn't have bothered to do on my own. But what I did end up doing on my own is, now, because of my lack of experience with doing any sort of 4x4 suspension work, I figured I wanted to do a lift kit that was probably the easiest possible way, and, you know, not just using spacer blocks with the stock springs. I didn't really feel like doing that. But I wanted to install something that wouldn't necessarily require me to do a bunch of changes elsewhere on the Jeep. So what I did do is I installed the Rough Country 2.5-inch suspension lift. So I've got the springs and the shocks on the front and the rear, and you know, by doing that, because of my research, I realized, okay, if I did that, I wouldn't need to do any changes with the control arms to, you know, kind of fix the pinion angle, because that was something I really wasn't actually aware of was a thing. But so yeah, and because I have a mechanical background working on, you know, shit boxes, getting the lift kit on there was, you know, fairly straightforward. It's like, okay, you take the old one out, you put the new one in. I mean, it's not difficult. But yeah, because of how much I had to learn about 4x4 suspension, I realized, well, possibly in the future, I may want to go larger. So I might as well start putting things in that will help me with that. So what I did do is also got the adjustable track bar for the front and the rear. And even though, according to, I think, most people, if you're doing a 2.5-inch suspension lift, you don't necessarily need to worry about that. I mean, I guess your angles are still probably close enough, but I decided I was going to put the adjustable track bars in there just so I can try to center everything as much as possible anyway. And that was probably going to be the extent of the modifications I did on the suspension anyway. Now, the next thing I was thinking about is trying to squeeze anything I possibly could out of the motor. And I don't want to do a stroker build or anything like that. I'm perfectly fine with the stock motor, but at the same time, I also figured, you know what, I'm going to blow some money. I'm going to put in the larger throttle body. I have a separate video about that because the one I received from the factory, like the gaskets just aren't, they weren't made properly, and there was a bunch of other, I don't know, odd problems that I had to kind of mess with myself. But I've actually been running, since that video, I've been running the BBK throttle body, and after the modifications I made to it to fix those problems I encountered, it's been running perfectly fine ever since. So yeah, no concern there. And then I also got the, I can't remember if it's the company K Suspension. They have an injector kit with Bosch injectors, I believe. They're either 4-point or 12-point injectors. I really don't remember, but I bought that set, put that in there. You know, I figured whatever, I'll just try to make this thing run maybe as efficiently as I possibly can without going too crazy. And that'll be the extent of anything I do under the hood probably. I do have I picked up from the junkyard one of those Ford Windstar air intakes. And what I might do is try to find a way to like wedge that in the engine bay, and then maybe actually make a pipe that sticks out along the side there somewhere to do a snorkel sort of intake. But that'll be a future project, not something I worry about right now. And the tires I was running previously were the 33-inch General Grabber ATX tires. That's not what's on there right now, but we'll get into that in a moment. The General Grabber tires, I liked them because they were a real budget choice. They were super cheap, and I didn't really want to spend a lot of money on my tires. So I was happy with those. And that was basically the way that my Jeep sat for at least a year with that configuration. And now we're into the summer of 2026. And unfortunately, I'm spending a bunch of money when I probably shouldn't be. And here's what's going to happen. My tires, so two of them, my old tires had a really bad wear right in the middle. And I don't know if maybe that's because I was maybe running a little too much PSI for the weight of this vehicle. But unfortunately, two of my tires got really badly worn. And then I did, about a month ago, I went and I drove up to the top of a fire lookout on Sugar Mountain, and I didn't realize it at the time, but at some point during that trip, I punctured one of my tires because later in the evening, I had the Jeep parked and I was just having some fun out in the water. I get back to the Jeep and one of my tires is going lower and lower, and I can hear the air leaking out of it. So I realized, okay, this tire's probably screwed. Luckily, I did have my full-size spare. I managed to get the vehicle back to my house, and then my full-size spare blew up because it was a horribly bad tire with it was all cracked on it from the weather and stuff. So yeah, unfortunately, I was in a situation where I needed tires badly. I couldn't wait. I was originally thinking those General Grabbers could get me through the summer, and then I would buy something after the winter. But nope, that was not the case. So unfortunately, I had to buy tires. And I was thinking at some point I was going to upgrade to 35-inch tires, basically because I want to see if it will help with, doing a bit of snow off-roading, that sort of thing. I don't actually drive these wheels in the winter when there's ice on the roads. I do actually have my factory wheels with studded ice tires because I live in an area that where, I've got hills all around me. The roads freeze. I need good tires that work on ice. So I was originally thinking, all right, I would just buy 35-inch General Grabber tires and call it a day. But unfortunately, I could not find them anywhere in Canada, so I had to spend even more money. And I got the Falcon Wild Peak AT4W tires. And these are, rated really good. I was originally thinking about the KO2 or KO3 tires, but those were probably about $100 more per tire than these were. Now, there was also some concern about the KO2 and the rain performance, but they fixed that in the KO3. But the KO3 maybe wasn't going to have as strong of a tread life compared to the KO2 or something like that. But anyway, those tires were something like between $450 and $500 a tire, I think, Canadian. And I found a tire store in Canada that had the Falcon Wild Peaks. I can't remember exactly. I think these were about 350 Canadian per tire, maybe a little bit more. And those were the absolute cheap, the cheapest all-terrain tires I could find. I was not gonna go mud terrain because I need this vehicle to do a lot of highway miles to get me to places like this. And I don't necessarily need mud terrain tires because I don't generally drive a lot in mud conditions. And I also didn't want to deal with the drop of the fuel mileage, considering everything else I'm doing to this vehicle is probably going to negatively affect my fuel mileage. I didn't want to have mud terrain tires on there as well, making it even worse. So I needed the absolute cheapest all-terrain tires I could find, and the Wild Peaks basically fit the bill. And these are the 35-inch tires. Now here's my problem. I knew I wanted to go with 35s, but my plan was to do it next year. I needed the tires now, so I figured there's no way I was going to buy another set of 33s and then have to buy tires again next year. So I figured I'd buy the 35s now, put them on, and then scramble to buy everything else that I need, because now what I'm going to do is lift the Jeep up more. And then part of that is replacing a bunch of other stuff. So I already have pretty much everything I need. So I've got the tires on here right now. There is a problem with some clearance. If I'm going over like a real big bump, the rear tires do kind of hit like that trim on the inside of the fender there. And I did actually have to cut some of that from the inside out. I could have just removed that inner trim altogether, but I didn't really want to do that. So I did have to shave a little bit on the inside. But I actually forgot to mention, I did put on these fender flares because when I had the 33-inch tires, they stick out beyond the factory flares. And I want to make sure this vehicle stays completely street legal. So I needed to have the wider fender flares on there to basically cover all of the tread in order to make sure that these would be street legal. I didn't want to do like mud flaps or stupid stuff like that. So luckily, having the flat fender flares on there lets me run these 35s without having them bind up in like the original flares. So yeah, I figured that because of the combination of suspension and body lift that I'm running, along with the fender flares, I could reasonably get around on 35s until I do my next lift kit. So, I mean, it works. Coming up the trail to get here, I did hear one of my tires kind of like bump into the trim somewhere in there, so I gotta be careful on that until I do the lift. But what we're going to do now is we are going to jump to my garage and I will go over all of the parts that I will be installing. All right, so now we're in the shop, which is basically just some shelf space in a garage. And let's talk about what's going in the Jeep. Now, if you're new to this sort of thing, you might want to do what I did initially, which is buy a kit with everything you need. And that's why I ended up with the Rough Country 2.5-inch suspension lift, because I didn't really know a whole lot about this stuff, so I figured just buying a kit with the components would probably be the easiest solution, and it was. I mean, I've run that kit on my Jeep for a few years now, and I mean, it works fine for me, so... But yeah, I am aware that Rough Country has other types of kits for various types of lift, but I'll explain what I'm doing and why I'm kind of piecing it together myself. So, start off with my coil springs. These are BDS coil springs, and it's a 3-inch lift. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, and it isn't. I am actually going to be using somewhere in here, I've actually got some Old Man Emu 10mm spacers as well. So it's going to be a little bit over 3-inch suspension lift. Plus, as mentioned earlier, I do have a body lift. So really my only need is to basically clear the 35-inch tires without any clearance issues. And there's probably a little bit more work I'm going to have to do around like the fender area. But I don't want a huge lift because that sort of, I think, introduces problems I don't want to deal with right now. So I've already got new control arms and stuff like that. We'll get to that in a minute. But if I go too high, then I'll probably run into an issue where I need to do maybe like a better, like upgraded rear drive shaft and stuff like that. And I don't really think that my requirements justify that sort of expense. I really just need a suspension that will clear the 35-inch tires. I don't want a ton of lift. I don't want the Jeep to be too high. That's not what I need. But basically, I'm just looking for something that works for my needs. And the parts that I've got here, I think will do that. So yeah, the 3-inch coil springs. Also up here, I've just got some Rubicon Express bump stops. I'll be working out a solution with I think these are for the front, so for the rear, I'll probably just put some rubber blocks in or something like that. Now, for the shocks, I've got the Rancho 5000X. Oh, everything's falling. So the 5000X seems like it's going to be a decent ride. Right now with the rough country stuff, it is a pretty stiff ride. Doesn't really bother me that much, but you know what? I'm willing to try some new stuff and see if that kind of like smooths the ride a little bit. And I did hear that these from the factory have kind of like a pretty shitty paint job. So I did like spray paint over all of the shocks. I do live in an area where it snows in the winter and I have to park outside and also drive in the winter. So I figured I should paint those so they don't get all rusty. So other than that, let's see, let's see, some more rough country stuff. The little pin eliminator kit thing where the shocks connect to. I think this is the other side. That's like shock relocation bracket. I think that's for the rear end at the bottom. But I have those because this is kind of annoying. I've actually had a problem when I did the rough country kit. On the rear shock at the top there, I think it's pretty common that thing was just rusted to hell completely, and I had to kind of like jank a solution up, and I don't really like that, so I'm going to replace that mount point with the kit here, so, and then yank that out of there, so. Yeah. Anyway, here's the thing as well. So now that I'm moving to a suspension that's, 3-inch and up, now I have to come to the point of spending even more money because there's a lot of extra things that I guess you need to really have your Jeep ride properly. So, control arms. I have adjustable control arms. These are rough country because they were the absolute cheapest, but I also had to upgrade these because I am aware that the joints on the rough country stuff, they don't last. So the solution is to spend even more money. So on the upper control arms, I'm going to just keep the original joints in there for now and basically see how long those last. But on the lower control arms, so I actually have the lower control arms already installed on the front, and then these are the rear. I never got around to doing it at the time. The front ones, I had the original rough country joints on there, and even though I don't do a whole lot of crazy off-roading, those things were pretty much destroyed within a year or two of having them installed. So what I did do is I got the rock jock joints here, and I've already installed these on the control arms that are in the Jeep. So on the rears, I figured I would do the same thing before I even install these because I know for a fact they're going to wear out. So I'll save myself the hassle now. They do have the proper size to replace these ones as well. But I think I'm just going to run the uppers with the original joints there, and I'll just see how long they last. More than likely I'll end up replacing them anyway, but yeah, I guess we'll see. One thing I probably should have considered is I could have just gotten with the rubber and not this type of joint, but yeah, I didn't really think about that. I mean, it's at this point, it doesn't really matter. I've already purchased these parts, so. But I suppose I could have just gone with like this sort of mount on both ends, but yeah, I don't know, whatever. So another reason that doing a suspension lift over 3 inches becomes a pain in the ass is you also have to get extended brake lines. I can't remember if these are like one of the rear lines or something like that. I do have 2 extended front brake hoses, and then I think I bought like 3 different rear ones, although I think I would only really need the one that's the center line, the ones that go to the rear calipers. I don't think that I would actually need those to be extended. But I have them anyway because they were cheap on Rock Auto, so. But yeah, if you don't have extended brake lines, then I think if your front wheels are like at full lock, then, you know, you could have an issue there, stuff like that. So this isn't really that expensive, so I guess it's just more of a hassle than anything else. But anyway, I think that covers everything that I will be installing in the near future here. Now, going and buying these things separately, like I chose BDS because they were probably one of the cheapest that I could find that wasn't, you know, some no-name Chinese Amazon brand. And I don't have any real crazy requirements. Like I was looking at the metal cloak, like I think it was the dual rate coils and stuff like that. I mean, that looks neat, but I don't think I need it. Now, one thing I kind of am thinking about is maybe I should have gone with 3.5-inch coil springs, and then also, you know, have that little bit of that 10mm spacer in there as well, just a little bit more to help the clearance of the 35-inch tires. But because I've got those flat fender flares on the Jeep, I think that even though this isn't a whole lot of lift, it probably should still be okay. I mean, I can always just upgrade these to higher ones in the future, but I've already got these, so I'm going to roll with these. And yeah, that pretty much covers it. Buying all of this stuff separately, I think it's cheaper than if I was to go, well, much cheaper than, you know, a full kit from, you know, one of these higher quality suspension brands. But I think you really need to do your research and buy what you need. I don't honestly need a really expensive suspension. It's not really something that I require for my type of driving. All I really need is just enough lift to clear the tires I want to run, and also to help with not having the bottom of my Jeep like slam into the ground when I'm clearing these deactivations on logging roads and stuff like that, because the way the Jeep sits right now, I mean, it's still decent, but yeah, certain things that I'm trying to drive over, it's just not enough lift to do it without just like slamming or scraping the bottom of the Jeep along all that stuff. So, but yeah, that's basically what I'm going to be doing. The installation, I'm hoping to do that within a couple weeks from now, but I guess we'll see how it goes. And yeah, once all of this stuff is in, then I got to learn how to do the measurements to correct pinion angle with the adjustable control arms. I don't know what I'm doing, so that will be interesting. Yeah. So another modification that I did, I realized that I needed to get a stronger solution for my tire carrier, because I was running my 33-inch spare with the factory hinges, and this thing started making the tailgate squeak really badly off-road, and it was driving me nuts, and like the whole thing just did not feel sturdy whatsoever. Originally, I was going to try and get the Rugged Ridge solution, but when I was trying to place the order on Amazon, they just wouldn't give me a delivery date. They were saying, oh, maybe in a few days. And then in a few days, they said, oh, maybe another few days. So I said, whatever. And then I ordered the More Ride kit. So basically, you've got two big pieces of steel. One kind of goes in back here to brace in here. The other goes along the tailgate. And then you've got these pretty heavy-duty hinges, which basically bolt in over top the steel plates. And then on the inside here, there's actually a bracket that connects the bolts from this hinge, and it bolts up into the roll bar that's in there. And this seems to be fairly steady, and it lets me close the tailgate absolutely perfect. It doesn't sound like absolute ass, like wiggling away when I had the original setup on here. And I am still using the original tire carrier, and I also wanted to keep the original tail light. So the tire carrier still bolted up exactly the same, Because of the offset of these wheels, I didn't need to like space them out or do anything crazy like that. I did, however, need to raise this up a little bit more to basically clear the larger spare tire whenever I get around to putting it on there, because I got to find a 35-inch spare tire. So I did actually have to use some spacers to make this sit a little bit higher. But other than that, the installation of that was actually pretty simple. I did make a little YouTube short on this, talking about it, but trying to keep a budget when you're buying stuff like that, this was 580 Canadian dollars. And aside from going with some cheap Chinese garbage, that was the absolute cheapest solution I could find to solve my squeaky tailgate problem. Holy hell, this thing's gonna make me broke. Yeah. So let's talk about something else before I forget, and that is the 35-inch tires and gear ratios. Now, this is something I was kind of thinking about when I was considering my decision to go with the 35-inch tires over the 33. Now, because this is a Rubicon, I do have the 410 gears, and this is also a 6-speed manual transmission. It's the NSG 370, and you might be wondering, am I going to re-gear my axles? The answer is no. Why? Because it costs money. But realistically, let's discuss it. I don't necessarily need to have that peppy feeling off the line, you know? Now that I have the 35-inch tires on here, I have been able to feel the difference in how this thing accelerates and stuff like that. And I'm realizing that I can live with this configuration. Now, this is probably like the very edge of what I would consider to be acceptable. There's no way I would be keeping 410 gears on anything larger than a 35-inch tire, because I think that would just feel a little too sluggish. But the reasons that I'm going to keep it like this include, number one, this is my daily driver. I do drive this around in my town where it's constant stop and go traffic. And to be honest, the first gear on the NSG 370 is really short and super annoying when you're driving in traffic. So before I got larger tires, I'd take off from a traffic light in first gear, and I'd maybe make it like 20 feet before I have to start shifting gears. And the great thing about the NSG 370 is that the synchros suck, and you can't slam gears quickly. You gotta shift slowly and in a certain way, or you'll make the transmission mad. It'll start grinding. So I'm okay with this not feeling fast off the line because it's a Jeep. Who gives a shit? I do actually prefer the off-the-line acceleration in this configuration because I don't have to switch from first to second gear quite as quickly anymore. And now I'm not talking about, oh, well, you could just rev it up to 6,000. No, I'm not going to do that. I typically shift around 3-ish up to 4, maybe, depending on the situation. But no, like, I'm not going to like keep first gear and then just roar through an intersection, taking like revving the piss out of it, and then still having to switch to second gear before you're even actually through the intersection. No. So the way I drive, I prefer this in traffic because shifting gears on this, you have to do it slowly. It's super annoying. So the less time that I have to spend banging through gears and the more time I can just spend accelerating, I don't know if I'm describing that properly, but the way this is, I'm okay with it. Now, when it comes to off-road performance and crawling along on, you know, real tough trails, well, it's a Rubicon, so I've got the Rubicon transfer case. So if I'm in 4 low, I mean, it's still just, it fulfills my needs. I don't need to be going super granny slow over giant rocks because that's not my driving style. That's not what I do off-road. So realistically, I don't think I necessarily have anything to gain by changing my gear ratio. I'm okay with this. It does mean that I've had to adjust my driving style slightly. So because there's a lot of hills in my area and where I am right now, I'm driving over mountain passes to get here. So I have to be wary of that and pick my gears differently now that I've got these larger tires, but I am okay with it, and I have no intention of changing the gear ratio. Also, my winter tires are a lot smaller than these. So when I put my winters on to deal with the icy roads in my city, I don't want to have some super crazy gears where I'm trying to like take off in first gear and having to shift like literally immediately. You know, that just does not sound like fun. So yeah, honestly, I'm okay with the configuration of the 35-inch tires and the 410 gears. All right, well, luckily the air isn't too bad up here. You can still see a little bit of haze. This is much better than Kelowna, where I live, where it's so smoky that my throat is actually getting sore. But I'm going to enjoy driving around the Jeep today. So I think that basically wraps up everything I'm doing to this as a budget build. Now, like I said before, I have no experience with building a 4x4. There's a lot of, you know, more advanced things that you could be doing, but I don't require that sort of stuff. I don't need a rock crawler because most of what I drive on are logging roads or, you know, this sort of trail getting to places like this. And I didn't really have to crawl over any huge boulders to get here. So I don't need a bunch of crazy articulation into my suspension. Yeah, I just mainly needed like clearance for the underside. Some of the logging roads that I drive on, they've got deactivations that you have to drive through. And with the old setup, with the 33-inch tires and the 2.5-inch suspension lift, I was still smacking the like the gas tank on like into the ground as I tried clearing those deactivations. So I realized that I needed a little bit more ground clearance, which is basically why, well, one of the reasons why I needed 35s and a bit more lift. But yeah, other than that, I did not need a really expensive setup. I mean, honestly, most of what I do is fairly basic, but a Jeep happens to do exactly what I want perfectly. I'm sure there's other vehicles I could have owned, but the reason I own the Jeep is actually because of the short wheelbase. It fits on my driveway with my Honda. So anything bigger than the Jeep would not fit on my driveway. And that's why I own one. I'm not like some crazy die-hard Jeep person. I don't care about ducks. I don't care about waving at people. I just wanted a 4x4, you know? I don't give a shit who makes it, but yeah, it just so happens the Jeep fits my needs perfectly. That's why I bought one. All right, so I think that's gonna do it for this video. If you have questions about Jeeps, don't ask me because I still don't know that much about Jeeps. There's a couple Jeep forums that have been really helpful. I don't remember what they are, but I mean, if you just search for a Jeep TJ forum, you'll probably find a couple different ones. But yeah, basically it's all a matter of doing a bunch of research, trying to understand how a lot of this stuff works, and to do a budget build, it's not difficult on the knowledge side of things. Your wallet won't like it. Even as cheap as you go with maybe like rough country equipment, which is generally the cheapest you can buy, it's still going to cost you a lot of money. So there is no such thing as an investment into a Jeep. You're losing money no matter what you do, but you're spending money to have fun. And I think that's all that really matters. And that's why I'm doing it. I'm never going to sell this Jeep as far as I know. I plan on keeping this for a long time. So it doesn't really matter to me how much money I sink into it, because I just want the vehicle to do exactly what I want, and I'll probably just keep it forever. So it all depends on what you want to do with your Jeep. Spend the money if you've got it. If you don't have it, don't load up your credit card. I've done that in the past. Not wise. Anyway, thanks for listening to my rambles. See ya.